Good afternoon and welcome into another episode here of Home Field Advantage. My name is Will Highland. I hope you're all having a great start to 2023. I realize it's been a long time since I had a normal podcast, not a special, and one done by myself without a guest. Not that we don't like having guests. We love having guests. Having, Cam and Diesel on before Christmas and then having Coach Laval on after Christmas, equally as worthwhile podcasts. And then, of course, the Winter Classic preview was certainly something that I enjoyed doing. But I digress. Here we are in the opening episode of Season 5 of Home Field Advantage. Can you believe it? For those of you who have been with me since the beginning, thank you. We love you. We appreciate you. You've watched us grow Home Field Advantage from a project beginning in a dorm room to something that I am very proud of and something that has grown, something that has made me become a better person, I think. I do truly think that podcasting has helped me communicate better outside of this show. And then lastly, it's been a wild ride of learning, figuring out what works, what doesn't work. We've tried segments that have bombed, right? We've done things that have really hit, introducing Diesel and Cam full-time here. When I started Sportland USA, getting Sportland USA as the flagship provider of this podcast, the home of this podcast, a network where we've expanded to do shows with Diesel on his own. We've done shows to do Survivor podcasts. It's truly been a journey. We've expanded into YouTube. I've gotten better at technology for sure. I've learned more about other sports thanks to guys like Josh Ricker. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you all. We head into season 5. This is going to be our best season yet. Season 3 was better than season 2 and 1 combined. Season 4 took and built off of what we did in season 3. And I think season 5 is going to be even better. We're going to come at you with more podcasts, more content, better interviews, better analysis. And for every one of you who has made this podcast special by contributing, by listening, by giving me feedback, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm super excited for what we have here in season 5. Just to point it out, you may have seen on Instagram, we were in the 87th percentile of podcasts on Spotify alone because of the content we put out, right? Like we were the 87th percentile in terms of minutes recorded and put out to you, the listeners. And that's because you guys demanded it. It's not because, I'm some great podcaster that, did all these things that other people weren't doing. It's because you guys, as my listeners, went out and continued to consume this podcast, which made me create more episodes. So it's really because of you. It's not because of anything I did. I mean, yeah, sure, I made some aesthetic upgrades behind me and this year, and also, went on to YouTube and stuff, invested in microphone technology, all this stuff. But that's peanuts compared to what you guys have done just by supporting this podcast and listening. And I can't thank you enough, and I'm super excited for what we have going on here in season 5. Now, that being said, there are 3 topics I want to talk about tonight. If you're listening later in the week, you certainly know how the Sunday game between the Patriots and Bills went. I'm not going to talk a lot about that in particular, because I think win or lose, like this Patriots season is what it is. And then I think win or lose for Buffalo, the stakes right now for them are way bigger than football. So clearly, unless you've been living under a rock, and I hate to use that term because this is a serious event, it's not like a joke or anything, obviously. There was a significant incident in Monday Night Football. Damar Hamlin, Bills safety, young man from Pittsburgh. For all intents and purposes, what I knew going into the game, great reputation in the league. Great dude, great student, great guy. And he had an episode on the field on Monday night in Cincinnati where he suffered a cardiac arrest. Now, the medical stuff, not going to talk a lot about because I don't personally know a lot about that stuff. I mean, Diesel might be able to tell you a little bit more if he was on the show, because he knows a lot about the body and the way everything works. That was his background. For me, I don't have a big background in that. And I know that over the last couple of years, especially the last 3 years, we've heard a lot about like, oh, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to trust the experts. And a lot of that is contrived. In this case, pretty straight and narrow. So I'm not going to act like I know what's going on with the health aspect of it, except for I'm really happy that throughout the week, there's been signs of improvement with Hamlin. I think Damar, being a young guy, that's got to be scary, right? Like more than once, he starts to recover and truly understand what happened to him. That's got to be really scary to know that happened to you at that young age. So I feel for him in the aftermath and how you mentally deal with that. I think that's something that not a lot of us have talked about this week. A lot of it with, obvious, with obvious goals in mind, where that he would just be a good guy again, like feel better again, that he would like live again, that he would survive. Like obviously that was where everyone's prayers and thoughts were, and obviously that's the focus that everyone had this week, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I know I've used the term obviously a lot, but I think it's pretty clear that that was not a bad focus that everyone had. But going forward, I feel bad for him, and the amount of mental recovery that he's going to have, knowing that at a young age he went through something like that as well, in addition to the physical recovery. So I feel for him emotionally, and I feel for his family emotionally too. Like for an episode like that to happen to a young player, like in football that there are inherent risks. Like I'm gonna go out on the field and potentially break my ankle or dislocate a bone or pull a muscle or tear a ligament or something like that. Most of the time, and these players will tell you, when they go out on the field, they're not thinking about that sort of thing happening. So it's got to be really shocking just to everybody. And I think that's where a lot of it originated, was just pure shock. Now, I have to admit, I didn't stay up and watch Monday Night Football because I had been at the Winter Classic all day in Boston and was about as tired as can be, and had to work the next morning for the first time in 12 days. So I wasn't exactly up and watching that game. So I can't speak to what happened in the moment. I think, a lot of my listeners, you guys probably were watching that game and can speak to that better than I can. But to me, I think there are 3 things that I want to look at after this is over, right? This situation, not that it's over, obviously, but that now that you can look back in it with a little bit of a macro lens and look at some of the themes that have come out of this. And look, let me be unequivocally clear. This is not a situation to be analyzed at the micro level, right? At the micro level, is Damar Hamlin going to be okay? Is this young man going to live? Are his family and his friends okay? How are the teams feeling? How is everyone doing emotionally? Is he going to be all right? We want to pray for him. We want to think about him. We want to do what's best for him and the Bills and the Bengals and everybody involved. We want to thank the athletic trainers. Like, that's the micro level. I don't think you can really analyze this at the micro level in a way that's ethical, in my opinion. This isn't something, if I suffer an injury, no one analyzes my injury. It's private, right? So I think I don't want to analyze the medical part of it and the micro level and all that stuff, because that's not really something to analyze. That's something to respect the details and facts of, and just, do our best as human beings to respect and pray and do all that for the Hamlin family. But what can, I think, be maybe not analyzed, but looked at, is the impact that this situation has had, both positively and negatively, on the world of sports. I think, and I've said this a lot on this program, that sports is a microcosm of culture. It's a barometer of how the rest of the country, in particular here in the US, feels about a certain situation. I think sports is the greatest unifier we have in our culture today, and that was clear this week. And I believe that sports has an inherent place in our society for healing. And we've seen this after tragedies like 9/11 or the Boston Marathon bombing. We've seen this even after horrific injuries that have resulted in fatalities or, critical medical conditions, such as when Dale Earnhardt died at Daytona, right? Or when Christian Eriksen collapsed on the pitch 2 years ago during the Euros. Those are the first two situations that came to my mind. Sports has played a unique role in the healing of certain events. And so that, I think, is fair to look at, is how sports has been impacted by this and how sports is impacting the rest of culture through this event. And to me, it comes down to three things. Two are about, these interpersonal dynamics that I've seen since this situation occurred. And the third is about what the league does to solve a unsolvable situation, right? And I'll get to that in a second. The first thing, though, of the three is I've been really impressed by the maturity of the players, the coaches, the media members in the NFL, or with ties to the NFL. I think for the most part, right? Everyone's going to talk about Skip Bayless or Bart Scott or all these guys, like, using this to, cause a stir on social media. To be fair, I mean, some of these takes are just ridiculous. Like the hot take Olympics that happens after every single thing that goes on, right? Whether it's, 2 years ago, Friday was, one of the most controversial days in the history of our country, right? And, people want to make the biggest, grandest takes about everything, right? Like that's what we do as in social media era, right? Like we go to great lengths to amplify our own voices. And so there's been a little bit of that, right? Like Bart Scott talking about T. Higgins. I don't think that was fair. I think T. Higgins had nothing to do with this, in my opinion. Again, not going to analyze the micro level because I don't think that's, fair. And then, Skip Bayless saying what he said about the implications of the game. We'll get to that in a little bit. I mean, that's a fair question in all honesty, but that's not a question you ask the night it happens, right? So those things obviously come with the territory. But I've been really impressed by the way Joe Burrow, Josh Allen in particular, handle themselves as the leaders of their teams, right? Josh Allen, unarguably the leader of the Buffalo Bills. And Joe Burrow, pretty hard to argue that he's not the leader of that Cincinnati franchise right now from a player standpoint. Both of those men, who are not much older than me, faced with a situation they've probably never experienced before, handled themselves in front of the media about as good as you can. When asked about it, multiple players, including Devin McCourty, who plays for the Patriots, was asked on WEI about the situation, handled it exactly how you would have thought. perfect, like a champ, like a human being, first and foremost. So I've been really impressed. Not that I didn't think that the players are going to, handle it in such a, commendable way. I'm not surprised, but I've been impressed, if that makes sense. There's a lot of good guys in the NFL. There's bad apples. Everyone talks about them. Right? No one talks about the good guys, except maybe once a year when they give out the Walter Payton Award. So I was really impressed with just the way everybody handled themselves from an on-the-field standpoint that day, the way Zach Taylor, Sean McDermott handled themselves. So there's not much to have any qualms about with that. I've also been very impressed, and this is the second thing. And look, I will say this, and I will say this with no hesitation. The way that this event has brought out the faithfulness and belief in God among players and coaches. And not just that, but the way that this event has amplified the power of healing prayer, the power of spirituality, and the power of brothers and sisters in Christ working with one another in prayer for this young man has been extraordinary. I know you're not supposed to talk about religion or religion or politics in a podcast. And I don't really think this applies in that way. I'm not trying to make the New York Times top 10 podcasts on politics, and I'm not trying to get an endorsement from any, civic religious league or anything. I'm just saying it as a believer in Christ and a believer in God and his healing power. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what men like Dan Orlovsky or Ben Watson or Sean McDermott have said and done, in the way that media members and fans and coaches and players and everybody involved has not just said thoughts and prayers, but Dan Orlovsky literally prayed on TV, on ESPN. Now, I said I wasn't going to venture too much into politics, but everybody knows how ESPN feels about this kind of thing. You don't even have to go longer than 10 years ago to see how they treated guys like Tim Tebow, right? How they cut Ben Watson's mic on CNN once. I know that's not ESPN, but we know how the media feels about this once. The minute Ben Watson brought up Jesus on CNN once, a few years ago, his mic got cut. So for Dan Orlovsky, who, in my opinion, is one of the nicest dudes in the league, for him to go on and pray on live TV was extraordinary. And for ESPN to have two anchors bow their heads at the same time was extraordinary. Now, look, these guys, I'm not happy that they did it for the sake of doing it. I'm happy because they felt compelled, and you can tell that they were compelled by a higher power to do that. It wasn't, I'm doing this for TV. You just knew that. The authenticity of it all, you knew, right? You knew that. And they were doing it because they deeply cared, as we all did, about the safety and well-being of Damar Hamlin. And so that, I believe, was such a watershed moment for just the re-acceptance of not just Christianity, obviously, but other people of faith exercising their First Amendment rights in public and doing so with sincerity and doing so with true purpose, not just virtue signaling for applause. And I think the way the sports world came together and rallied behind this young man and truly meant what they said was extraordinary and awesome. The way that people came together and support, like the stuff that went on with his charity. Hamlin had a charity and his goal was to raise $3,000. He's raised millions of dollars. He had a toys charity, I believe, for kids in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. It was supposed to raise $3,000. It's raised millions of dollars. The Crafts have donated. Brady, Gronkowski, players and coaches around the league, celebrities. It's an amazing thing. You know, what sports can do to bring people together, what God can do through sports to bring people together is amazing. And it deserves to be talked about. You know, I don't, nobody has to believe what everyone else believes. That's not what I'm saying. But when people come forward and do it, and you see the way that God's moving their heart, right? You know, for Ben Watson to go on CNN with Anderson Cooper again and have them not cut his mic this time when he talks about, you know, Jesus and the afterlife and eternity and love and respect and all these Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, you know, just faith values. Doesn't really matter what religion. I think that happening in sports is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes it gets looked at like a bad thing or like, you know, something that people are doing out of self-serving nature. This was not that at all. It was people coming together for the support of Hamlin and his family. And I was really impressed with it. Now, last but not least, or maybe last but least, actually, it's not often you hear that phrase. The way the NFL has had to handle this situation, I do have to give them credit. Now, the NFL, everyone hates the NFL. The NFL league office is probably one of the most hated organizations in American sports because people look at the NFL as a big greedy corporation. And I mean, they're right. They are. And there's a lot at stake with this game. But where I give the NFL credit is this. They were not only faced with an immediate crisis of a man's life that needed to be addressed, immediate crisis. We, first and foremost, Mr. Hamlin needs to be resuscitated by the athletic trainers, right? Be brought, or whatever the correct term is, again, not a doctor. And he immediately needs to be given care. That the medical staff saved his life, and the NFL, with their protocols that they've put into place, deserve credit for that. Secondly, the NFL is not only dealing with a major health crisis involving an athlete on one of its best teams, they're also dealing with the imminent threat of this game being in jeopardy and how to navigate the waters of doing what's right by the family of Damar Hamlin, doing what's right by the league, sorry, not the league, the team of the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. They also had to do what's right by their stakeholders that have invested millions, if not billions of dollars into this league. You know, it's not like they can just push everything back a week. The NFL is a machine. It has advertisers that spend billions of dollars. It has stakeholders that invest billions of dollars into its television product, most notably the major networks. We've got some what I thought could have been breaking Red Sox news, but never mind. We also have a situation where we've talked about the first thing, the immediate health needs of Damar Hamlin. Then they had to do what's right by the teams and the stakeholders. But then on top of that, this game also happened to involve two teams that were at the top of their conference, playing one another in a game that had significant implications on the outcome of playoff seeding. So the NFL had to take into account how this was going to affect the playoff structure, right? It's not just that the teams were playing one another and the game could just be canceled and looked at as moot. It was that the game needed to be canceled that night on Monday night. No one's arguing that. It was that, are we going to play it again? What are we going to do about the playoffs? They were put in an impossible position this week, all right? Everyone needs to understand that. It's not as simple as me sitting here, scrolling through Twitter, having an opinion. The NFL was put in an impossible situation. They had to do what was morally right in an unprecedented situation that also had significant ramifications on the future of their league and stakeholders who had paid hundreds of billions of dollars for this season, and they had to figure out a way to make it right. Now, we can argue about the outcome, right? It's essentially a foregone conclusion now that the Chiefs, as a result of this game not being played again, are going to get the number one seed in the AFC. There's a lot being talked about if that's fair. I don't know. There's also a lot being talked about, if the game should have been called a tie, what should have happened. It was an unprecedented situation because of all the things I've outlined. And so I believe the NFL deserves a little bit of credit for the way they handled it, because they did, at the end of the day, they did what was morally right. Nobody played again, right? We've had situations where, like Ryan Shazier, pretty much got paralyzed on the field a few years ago. They resumed the game that night. That probably should not have happened. But the NFL, to their credit, knew the situation. There's been conflicting reports about a 5-minute warm-up and all this stuff. That's not what it's about. It's not about, was Joe Buck right? Was the league wrong? Was it the right thing? Like, ultimately, they did the right thing. They did not play that game, and they did not force the Bills or the Bengals to play a game last week, whether it have been Wednesday or Thursday, and moved, their subsequent games up. They were already facing a really tight schedule because of the playoffs beginning next week, and they want all the games that have to do with one another to be played at the same time for obvious gambling and finance reasons and competitive integrity reasons. So they're already dealing with that. And then they have this once, in a lifetime horrible situation. And I think they deserve a little bit of credit. So that's my third take. I know that might not be a popular take, but I think the way they handled it behind closed doors, they were close to the vest. They didn't leak a lot of stuff. There wasn't a lot of people playing hot take Olympics. Guys like Schefter and Rappaport were pretty quiet all week. And I think that is a testament to the NFL finally getting it right on a moral ground. So when faced with a pretty impossible situation, I don't know what I would have done differently than what they did. A lot of people are going to be upset about especially Bills and Bengals fans. Look, I get it, right? Like, there was already a narrative out there that the Chiefs get special treatment from the league, right? The Bills and the Bengals both beat the Chiefs this year, and yet the Chiefs, by virtue of this situation, are ranked ahead of them in the seedings. That sucks. But I think the NFL did the right thing. There was no way they were going to play that game. They did not need to, and they should not have. And they did that right. So I guess the best news of all is that it looks like Mr. Hamlin is on the mend. He's been in contact with his teammates. His family has been in contact with media outlets. And it looks like things are improving. So that's good news. All right, moving on. Just real quick, got two thoughts. Good news and bad news before we close out. more good news is that Rafael Devers has signed an 11-year, $331 million contract to have his current deal extended with the Red Sox. He will be a Red Sox, I believe, through 2035, which is amazing news for the team and for this franchise that desperately needs something good to happen. I mean, that sounds funny considering, my grandparents' generation went 86 years without seeing a Red Sox win the World Series. I'm looking at a banner on the other side of my room here. I count 4 in my lifetime. So, kind of hard to say that they did something right for a change, but considering the way the Mookie Betts thing went down, the Xander Bogaerts thing went down, we beat that as dead as you can of a horse. Maybe I shouldn't use beating a dead horse as a pun anymore. I don't know. Might not be the best idiom, I guess. But we've talked about that at length. So I'm not going to just continue to ramble about that. We all know how I feel about that. But for Rafael Devers to be the centerpiece of this Red Sox team for the foreseeable future is a good thing. This guy made his major league debut with the Red Sox, I believe, a week before I turned 20 years old. It's likely that he plays with the Red Sox at least through the time I am 37. That's awesome. I can't tell you the last guy who played for the Red Sox for 17 years. Jason Varitek? No, I don't think so. Tim Wakefield? Probably. It's probably Tim Wakefield. Even Ortiz was only with the Red Sox for 13 years. So that's great news. Is that Devers is going to be the centerpiece of this team. My question for the Red Sox is, what's next? Right? Like, it sounds like such a Red Sox thing to say. Okay, Heimblum, we were yelling at you to sign Devers. You did. John Henry was literally getting yelled at a Bruins game at Fenway Park, which we'll get to in a second. And we did it. They did it. So kind of unfair to just immediately ask what's next. But I'm sorry, we're the Boston freaking Red Sox. I deserve as a fan, considering what's happened in my lifetime, we owe it, as I said before, to my grandparents' generation to compete for a championship every year. We are a big market team. So what's next? Well, I think on paper, they have a decent lineup. Now, there are considerable holes in 3 categories. Starting pitching. Sorry. I shouldn't say that's a hole. I think that's a question mark. Big question mark with starting pitching, especially as it pertains to health. Corey Kluber, he'll be signing up for AARP pretty soon. All right. We've got a situation where Chris Sale, if he's healthy and pitches well, could still at this age be one of the best pitchers in baseball. That's a massive question mark. James Paxton, a few years ago, was a highly regarded free agent target, Cy Young candidate. His career's taken a toll because of injuries, right? Tanner Houck, Garrett Whitlock. Are these guys going to be in the bullpen? What's going to go on? So there's a lot of question marks. All right. I think the bullpen is pretty set. I don't love it, but I think we've got some options there. I mean, we got more options for closers than the Cheesecake Factory. All right. So I'm pretty bullish on the bullpen this year compared to previous seasons where we were trotting out guys who I literally could see them on the street and might mistake them for a country singer. The outfield, I think, is a hole. I mean, I like Kike. He's coming off an injury. This guy from Japan could be the real deal or it could be a massive bust. That's how these things typically work out. They're either amazing, like Yu Darvish or obviously Shohei Ohtani, Ichiro, you can go down the line through history, or they're busts. Like, have we ever heard of, I can't even remember the guy's name who signed with the Diamondbacks a few years ago. Like, he could be in witness protection at this point, like with Jack Ryan somewhere in Austria. I have no idea. So I think that is a little bit of a question mark for the Red Sox is the outfield. Like Verdugo, what is Alex Verdugo? Is he good? Is he average? No one really knows. This guy from Japan could suck, could be awesome. And Kike was hurt last year. We don't even know if he's going to play the outfield. We don't know what Jarren Duran is. I'm probably forgetting an outfielder, to be quite honest. Hami Pham? No, he's not with the team. Jeez, I'm losing track. We've been a revolving door. We've had more revolving doors than a Ritz-Carlton. All right, no more analogies. Catching situation, question mark. Rhys McGuire is okay. He's pretty good. He had pretty good average last year. And Connor Wong, meh. We'll see. But I think the third hole is the biggest one, and that's who's going to play shortstop. You know, I thought that breaking Red Sox news could have been Carlos Correa. At this point, that's a pipe dream. I'm sorry. The dude's already been through 2 failed physicals. Something's going on here. Not interested. I'm sorry. Now, if the money was right and it was short term and the Red Sox could get out of it if he has a massive injury problem, sure. But I'm not going to lose sleep if the Red Sox don't go out and sign into a ridiculous 12-year contract. If you were going to do that for Xander Bogaerts, I don't really want you to do it for Carlos Correa either. They're not that far apart in age. And while Correa obviously has a little bit more talent and a lot more power, he's not, the intangible type player that Bogaerts is. I'm sorry. So I guess my question for the Red Sox is, awesome, we got Devers. What's next? Because this Red Sox team cannot just do what they have to do, right? Like, signing Rafael Devers should never have been something I should have to celebrate. It should be something that was like a foregone conclusion, right? So hard to diss on the Red Sox after they do what we asked them to do. So I guess the bottom line is, if you're a Red Sox fan, sleep better at night. But I'm not going to be glued to my phone the rest of the offseason waiting for the next domino to drop, even though I believe it should happen. All right, last but not least here, just got to close out talking about the Winter Classic. As you guys might have known, I went to the Winter Classic with my brother-in-law. It was amazing. All right. It was probably the purest sports moment I've witnessed in my life since the Red Sox 2013 Duck Boat Parade. It was a mix of nostalgia, right? You're in Fenway Park. They're wearing old jerseys. You've got Bobby Orr and Johnny Busick there. You've got Tim Wakefield and Zdeno Chara and Jason Varitek on hand. You've got the who's who of NHL and MLB folks on hand, and you're in Fenway Park. In my opinion, the best atmosphere, if you're just talking about a crowd. Like, when a crowd gets going at Fenway, it's different than any other crowd, whether you're watching it on TV or whether you're there like I was. Amazing. And the third part of that nostalgia and of that aesthetic was the color contrast, right? You had black and gold all over the place, right? You had, the Penguins and Bruins both wearing black and gold, white. The fans were all wearing black and gold. You had the white grass area that had been filled in with fake snow. And then you had the green, trim and backgrounds of Fenway Park. You had the blue sky with a little bit of a pink hue later on, some white clouds. Like, it was like pure. It was amazing. And the flyover with the Air Force F-16, it was epic. It like, from pure aesthetic point, like, they had Sam Hunt performing before the game. Everyone was decked out in Bruins gear. Everyone was hardcore excited. It was like you could feel the energy. And I know that's a cliche, but it was literally like when you walked into Fenway, it was like you were walking into a painting. So that was awesome. Now, in terms of the game kind of sucked for the first like 35 minutes. Not just because the Bruins got down 1-0 early, but because it was one of those situations where there was a lot of icing, a lot of offside calls because of the puck. And, I don't really think the ice was that bad. I think it was just that the players are feeling it out, and there was some missed passes and this and that. And it was a little sloppy. And there was a lot of whistles. And in the way my seats were configured, I could see one end of the ice really well, but the other end of the ice had a pole in the way. Welcome to Fenway, right? I had two poles in the way. I had a pesky pole and then another pole. I really wanted to sit in the upper bowl, but they were all sold out, and if they weren't sold out, they were like more than a mortgage payment for one ticket. So no. And I don't mean to complain. I was in the building, which I guess is all that matters. So I could see one end of the ice really well. The other end was really tough. So when the play went to one side of the ice, I kind of had to look up at the Jumbotron. There were guys in my section that were looking up at the Jumbotron the whole time. And it was like, okay, come on. Like, at least try and look at the real game. So I had binoculars, which was a lifesaver. So the game itself was a little choppy. But then, with Jake DeBrusk, who, by the way, prior to this injury that he's had, he's a legit top 6 forward in the NHL. And so for him to get that tying goal after everything, the trade request, the disagreements with Bruce Cassidy, yada, 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 that was awesome. So I was really into that. The place was alive. It was actually alive when that power play happened. So there's a call, I think, against Brian Dumoulin, shout out Biddeford, Maine. And he went to the box, and the Bruins had some time in the attacking zone. We were really starting to wear out the Penguins, I think. And it was actually the power play had expired, and Marchand did this sort of like shimmy shake to get past the defender, get a shot on net. And DeBrusk, picking up his first of what would be 2 rebound goals, the place like became even more alive than it had been when the power play began. And so that I think left a energy in the crowd that resonated on the team, and the team sort of got to pick me up, I think, from that crowd, like sort of just coming to its feet. We know that like Nick Foligno had talked to them in the locker room before coming up for the third period, and then when they got the game-winning goal with like 3 minutes to go, it was bedlam. It was the most loud I've ever heard Fenway Park. And I've been to Fenway Park for Red Sox playoff games. I've been to Fenway Park for amazing walk-off Red Sox wins in years where they won the World Series. And I was there for Mookie Betts' last game as a Red Sox when he walked it off. And I've been at Fenway for a lot of Red Sox games, and it was loud. But that was the loudest I've ever heard Fenway Park. Like with the goal song and everybody cheering and it echoing behind me in the bowels of Fenway Park, it was epic. And so I think this Bruins team showed something special, because as I said in the preview, the Bruins, if they lost, there would have been a letdown factor. And if the Penguins had won, they would have, gotten some momentum. But I think I underestimated one thing. I underestimated that if this is truly to be a special year for the Boston Bruins, if this truly is going to be a year in which they win the Stanley Cup, which, cross my fingers, I sure as hell hope happens, then they have to win a game like this, right? Like, it's Fenway Park, it's the Penguins, it's John Henry's Penguins, right? I told you earlier, he was literally booed, right? They come in wearing Red Sox garb. It was epic. they had to win that game if this was going to be a storybook season. I still think it probably could have been without it, but it just adds to the aura of this team. This team just, you saw David Pastrnak the other night. He just went full sicko mode on the Los Angeles Kings. Like, Jake DeBrusk went to another level against the Penguins at Fenway. I mean, the way that this team plays in the third period, Taylor Hall is out here playing like he just loves the game. He's not worried about being the guy like he was in New Jersey or Edmonton, right? Patrice Bergeron is out here. He just loves, I think besides his family, he loves the Boston Bruins more than anything. You know, same thing with David Krejci. These guys are out here, Swayman and Ullmark having the time of their lives, right? Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm together look like, you know, they could easily be the anchors of a 1 and 2 D pairing of a Stanley Cup winning team. Like, they have the DNA. And so for this game, they needed that win. Like, I would have looked back at the experience and said, oh yeah, you know, it was a fun atmosphere at the beginning, but they lost. You know, we would have probably talked about, oh, well, you know, it got a little cold later, or, you know, the traffic, or the view wasn't that amazing, or, you know, I was kind of hungry. But the way the Bruins won in the fashion that they did, my brother-in-law and I, Freudian slip there, almost feels like one after that. I mean, we were together for like 14 hours. Felt like, you know, we're blood brothers by the end of that situation, the emotional roller coaster of that game. But he and I walked away from that game back to his car, talking about how it was one of the best sporting events we've ever experienced. That's the power of this Bruins team. They turned an event that was already amazing into arguably the best sporting event I've ever attended. And for that, this is a special team. You know, obviously this Jake DeBrusk injury hurts. This Jake DeBrusk injury is not, is not without consequence. The Bruins are going to have to figure out what they want to do. Are they going to go get somebody at the deadline? Are they going to call up Fabian Lysell? Or are they going to, you know, just rely on Zacha and then maybe another depth guy to fill that hole while DeBrusk is hurt? But just that as a microcosm, the fact that a guy like Jake DeBrusk, who wanted to leave Boston, a dude from the West, you know, wasn't really getting along with Bruce Cassidy. His family's from Alberta, right? Like, it could have been easy to trade a guy like him to the Flames or to the Oilers or Jets or Kraken and never to be seen from again. You know, a lot of people thought Jake DeBrusk was soft. I've always liked Jake DeBrusk. I think he's the perfect Bruin. I think he gets those gritty goals, right? So a guy like Jake DeBrusk playing through an injury of broken fibula in a big moment like this and scoring not just the game tying, but the game winning goal shows you how special this Bruins team is. So I think if you're a Bruins fan, you should be super happy with that outcome. Hopefully they keep it going on this West Coast road trip, and hopefully they don't win the President's Trophy, because I don't want that jinx on us. But my friend Brody Sylvia, I hope he's listening. I would much rather have his Carolina Hurricanes go home with the President's Trophy than my Boston Bruins, so that they can deal with that kind of pressure in the postseason. I don't want it. But nevertheless, this Bruins team is special, and I think that Winter Classic was a perfect representation of the way this Bruins team has played this year and battled adversity all year long. And the way individuals, in particular Jake DeBrusk and Taylor Hall and others, have found a home here. So it's special. That's going to do it for this episode here of Home Field Advantage. Hope you enjoyed the program. We'll be back next week talking some NFL playoffs. See if my Patriots are involved at all. We will see. Time will tell. In the meantime, please check us out over at Instagram and Twitter at HomeFieldPod. Please also like, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, if this is the first time you have. listened. If you haven't listened and you search for us every time and listen anyway, then you can certainly subscribe and make it easier on yourself. You can do so at Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please subscribe to us on YouTube below, Sportland USA Productions. We'd love to have you get started with us in season 5. And once again, as I said at the outset, thank you all for your contributions to this show over season 4. I'm super excited to kick it off here for season 5. But until episode 2 of season 5, my name is Will Highland, and you've been listening to Home Field Advantage.